Hello, good morning, hackers. Good afternoon, hackers. Good night, hackers. I don't know. Whenever you are listening, this is the HackerNoon Podcast. Welcome. I am very excited to talk to Sarah Day today. About technical writing. So, Sarah, what is your official job title? Technical writer?
I think in our HR software it says technical writer manager, which probably is not as linguistically correct as technical writing manager, which is what I actually am and do.
Okay, cool. And you work at LaunchDarkly, so I'm really excited to talk to you today about your editorial process and talking about the different kinds of writing, technical writing versus copywriting versus document writing. And then I want to talk to you about also hiring a technical writer and when that would come about. So I'm excited to get into that. So first of all, I am excited today to talk to you about editorial review because I am also a editor at HackerNoon. So I've been doing this for about 7 months now and maybe a little bit more at this point. And I love it. This is my first official editor job. I have done like editing in the past as part of other jobs, but this is my first like a big official editor job. So when did you become an editor?
Well, I've never had editor as like my job title at a place of employment before, at least not in like tech. Mm-hmm. But there's a component of editorial work that goes into publishing all forms of documentation, whether you're writing your own sort of first draft content and publishing it yourself, or taking content from that someone else has provided, like an engineer or a support tech or QA person. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those skills that you can certainly lean into in documentation and tech writing work. But it's kind of foundational for all of the work that we do. So I guess that's a long way of saying that I've been doing it my whole career to some degree.
Okay. Right. Yeah. And I imagine that like in a technical writing role, you have a lot of content that comes from the actual like developers or engineers that are very like tech speak. And that's why I kind of picture editing as like a big portion of your role, just because like incorporating what the written content of the engineers write and then adding in like the proper grammar and like decoding the technical speak, like is that part of your job?
Yes, for sure. It definitely is. And depending on both the audience of whatever it is that you're trying to publish and, you know, the product and kind of like the market space that you're working in, you can choose to publish more heavily technical content or less technical content. So like, for example, the language that I would consider acceptable to use in, I don't know, a piece of documentation about how to reset your password, because I would be assuming that people who need documentation guidance on how to reset your password are probably less tech savvy than someone who's like setting up an SDK or making an API call for the first time, right? I would expect a much lower barrier to entry in terms of like comprehensibility of the language that you use for a document like that than something that's like, here is how we, open ports in our firewall. Here is how we set up a load balancer, and more technical content like that.
So what is your preference in terms of like level of technical aspects of writing?
Oh, I mean, it depends. It depends on what you're writing. I always prefer the thing that is less jargony and more clear. And more clear often involves using a smaller subset of like vocabulary, for example, or yeah.
I feel like I need to ask you, what is your number one pet peeve when it comes to grammar and writing? Because we have a lot of people that write for HackerNoon. Wait, what did you say?
I said, can I have two? I have two.
Yes. Okay. I love you already know. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Let's go.
So the first one is the passive voice. Stop using the passive voice. It
okay.
Never, like, especially people who grew up writing American English and American Science English have a tendency to use the passive voice because there is an idea in some types of writing that if you distance yourself or the subject from the verbs that you are using, it sounds more official and more clear. This is not true. The opposite of this is true. You were wrong. Your feelings about this are wrong. I'm sorry to tell you, but yes. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, agree.
The other thing is using, this is weird and like precious of me, but like bear with me. The other thing is using sentence structure rather than formatting to emphasize important stuff in text. So for example, if you start a paragraph with the phrase, note that this thing occurs, or it is very important, if you bury the sentence, like it is very important that you do this thing this way, it's going to get lost. Your reader, the way that a person perceives text information on a screen is very skim heavy and very like top down. And when you put a paragraph that's like 3 or 4 lines in the middle of something, odds are a person is not going to read every single word in that paragraph, because reading on a screen is not the same as reading on a book. Like, for example, I have our the email that you sent me with our session notes in it from last week up in a panel next to the Zoom client that I'm looking at right now. And there is a moving graphic that I think is like the HackerNoon like green graphic. It's just like constantly scrolling. I actually have to close this because it's distracting, right? But this is what reading on a screen is like, because there's more color, there's more motion, and there are more distractions than when you're reading in a book, right? And so people will write documentation with this mentality that every single word on the page is going to be read. That's not true, and it's never true. But the benefit of this is that you have a lot more opportunities to get the reader's attention, right? So if you do things like, instead of starting a sentence with like, note that, or saying it's critically important that, instead you put it in a big box and you make a big box and you make the box a color and you bold all the things at the top of it, right? People's eyes are drawn to the things that look different on the screen. And so like, rather than using words to indicate importance, you should be looking for opportunities to use formatting and structure instead. As you can tell, my cup of green tea just kicked in and I'm like ready to go.
We're ready to go. I know. I love this because like anyone who is obsessed with like wording, grammar, proper English will get so hype about this.
I know, and I don't want to be like dictatorial about it, because like language, there is no, I mean, the concept of there being like one correct way to do anything, I mean, in my opinion, anything in life is something that you should investigate, really. Like,
yes.
It's not ever true. And I'm absolutely not like a linguistic totalitarian about things like this, because language is evolving all the time. But like, one of the ways that it's evolving is we are looking at how, like, there are ways to present language that exist today that didn't exist 25 years ago. Like I put GIFs in documentation now, right? Like, people 25 years ago were not doing that. I wasn't writing documentation 25 years ago, but point stands. So like we should always be looking for how we can evolve our use of language to best capitalize on the tools that we have to present the information that we want to convey.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let me quickly tell you mine, though. My number one grammatical pet peeve is when people use like a title or something and they say how to X, but then they put a question mark at the end. Like, it's not a question. How to something is not a question.
How to X.
How to write?
How is words formed?
Why? It's not a question. It's a statement.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me started on like FAQs and troubleshooting in docs. I'm super judgmental about them. Anyway.
But like not totalitarian about it.
There are so many appropriate ways to convey information, and often my opinions about them are right. That's all.
Yes. 100%. Yeah. So then to build off of what you've just said, HackerNoon writers, this is a tip when you're contributing. There is a little like quote thing in the editor where it like builds out a quote section. So like it captures your eye. So if you're going to put something important, like put it into a quote, because then people will look at that more. Plus, like, shout out to our Markdown editor, Markdown for What? It's our 3.0 editor, and that has like way more stuff in it that has like things that will build out content for you, like to capture your eye. So there's like little like, yeah, like you said, there's like a little box that like makes the color different in there and like everything. So yeah, definitely all of our contributors check that out. But Anyways, yeah. So I want to talk to you too about the differences between like technical writing and other kinds of writing, to build off of more of what you just said. Because yeah, when you write for documentation, how does your brain think differently than when you're writing for like marketing copy or something?
Sure. I mean, I think I have to preface by saying, like, I've never been employed as a marketing writer, and like marketing writing is like a unique and special skill that like I is not like superior or inferior to technical writing, but like wants to achieve a different set of goals, right? So for me, when I'm working as a technical writer, my job is to explain the things that a product does, including the limitations of the product, right? So I want to document everything that isn't readily available to see on a screen about a piece of software, including all of the warts, including the ways that like the interactions that are not super slick and the bugs that might pop up and the places where people like might have failures in interactions, right? Marketing writing, I think, is a little bit more about telling like a story that kind of brings the user's mind to the opportunities that they might be able to like capitalize on by using a piece of software. You know what I mean?
Okay, wait. Are you saying that you're basically almost like the antithesis of marketing writing when you're like talking about the things that like could mess people up?
So like marketing writing, I think it tells the story of what a piece of software could do in ideal conditions and like the human needs that could be met by a piece of software, right? Technical writing, especially because often you can't fully document something until it's completely built. And usually like when you are building a piece of software, you're making technical trade-offs and considerations that might damage the overall user experience, even like temporarily, right?
Yeah.
Technical writing is about making the software easier to use, and that means you have to talk about the places where the software is hard to use.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And it's software, so like obviously you're gonna have that no matter what it is, and every software has technical documentation. Okay, so can we talk about what kinds of documents you actually write then? I think I need to like wrap my mind around this.
Yeah, so like what, for example, what I'm working on today is a piece of documentation for our early access program for basically there's a small group of customers. You can opt into this if you want to through our sales site or through the doc site that get pre-release access to a limited set of features in exchange for feedback to us, right? And this is a classic example of where technical writing and marketing writing really diverge, right? Because I'm writing a piece of documentation that is intended to explain how a feature works. But the feature, when it goes out to our EAP customers, is not going to be what we call like production ready yet, right? So it's not going to be, I can't remember exactly the difference between the EAP version and the GA version, but like there may be some features that are not fully built out. There may be some parts of the UI that are not completely interactive. And it's my job to document those things and explain that they're not working yet. Right, which is something you never see in marketing writing. Marketing writing is always like, look, it's beautiful and it's done. And I'm like, well, it's ugly and it's getting there, but you know, enjoy it, isn't it? Let's see. So I write product documentation of the kind that I just described, right? I've been doing a lot of information architecture work where I look at the entire set of content that's on a part of the doc site and try to imagine how to rearrange or represent it in a way that makes it more user-friendly and accessible to people. Let's see, what else have I been doing? Honestly, as a manager right now, I have been doing less writing and more working on hiring and like OKRs, which I think is just part of the nature of the beast of getting into management. Yeah. It's like less tactical short-term work and more long-term strategic work.
I want to ask you about the range of people that are reading your work then? Like, what are their technical levels of expertise?
It really varies. LaunchDarkly more so than other companies that I've worked at because so much of our user base is developers, and we have a frequent like sales conversion pattern where a person will leave the company that they have been working at, like a software engineer will leave the company they've been working at, having been a user of LaunchDarkly at that company, and then go to a new company and say, hey, we were using this really awesome tool at my old company, we should buy it here too, right? Like this is an unusual sales pattern compared to other places that I've worked. So the doc site has a ton of pre-sales impact. We get a lot of people who are interested in, or like thinking about buying LaunchDarkly or is setting up a trial, excuse me, who haven't actually used it yet. And so because of that, we try to make our like getting started sort of introduction to LaunchDarkly docs like really front and center and really obvious and like kind of easy to use. So we get a lot of software engineers reading our docs. Our SDK docs are really heavily trafficked because that's another thing you need to do. Like one of the foundational parts of setting up LaunchDarkly in your organization is choosing and implementing one of our SDKs. And we get a lot of what I would call like users at companies who might have more buying power. So like product managers, VP director, like C-level employees, right? People who could actually decide, okay, we want to like enter into a business relationship with this company. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to reframe my original question then to say, how does your thinking differ when you're writing for an audience that is more technical versus less technical?
Oh, sure. Sorry, did I just walk over the end of your question?
No, that's it.
More technical consumers of documentation, in my experience, tends to need less hand-holding in terms of like the procedural steps to accomplish a task, right? Less technical consumers of documentation tend to rely more heavily on product UI and need, I think this varies from reader to reader, but I don't rely on the same set of understanding of technical concepts when I'm thinking about writing docs for a less technical person, right? So like, I may use more jargon or make reference to more like third-party tools or like software, like, I don't know, like coding techniques, for example, when I'm writing documentation for like our SDKs, because the audience for the SDK docs is extremely technical. When I'm writing our guides, like we have a section on docs.launchdarkly.com that is just titled guides. When I'm writing our guides, I assume that the people who read them are not necessarily going to have the same level of technical knowledge as a software engineer, right? So they might be somebody who's setting up LaunchDarkly for the first time. They might be somebody who needs to understand sort of some of the core principles of feature flagging and feature flag best practices, but through the lens of the UI that LaunchDarkly, like the actual platform, provides, rather than doing it through API calls or through an SDK. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds more like me. Okay, cool.
I think it's most people, right? Yeah, there's a reason that we build a big beautiful web app because not everybody is comfortable working on the command line, and it's like it's just a tool set. There's no hierarchy. There's no prestige to like being able to do it one way or the other.
Yeah. That's why I think it's interesting to have such a varying level of like writing audience where you want to incorporate like the technical aspects that people need to know, but keep it simple enough that like even someone who is like a junior level maybe or something would understand it. So yeah, that's really interesting. So I want to ask about the other kinds of writing jobs that you've had in the past. As a technical writer, have you had to bounce around a lot?
Had to is like an interesting turn of phrase, right? I think a lot of people get into technical writing because they enjoy the flexibility of the work. Technical writing has a lot of contractors in it, and contracting is a lifestyle that works very well for many people. As a person who's more anxious, I like the security of having a full-time 9-to-5 job.
Okay.
And so I have certainly done plenty of contracting work in my career, but I've always preferred to have a full-time job, both because I like the predictability of it, but also because since I was born and raised in the Bay Area, and my career really took off when I started working in startups, and I have really come to enjoy the process of watching a company go from sort of small and more intimate and more focused to something that is growing so explosively you have to like really aggressively rein in the things that you're trying to do. And I feel like LaunchDarkly is really we're really building up a head of steam about a lot of the stuff that we're doing, and it's pretty nice. It's really fun.
Yeah. Okay, I think by bounce around I've actually meant like contract work, because I think in my mind, like as a technical writer, that I imagine you would be doing a lot of contract work for like a little bit here, a little bit there. I'm just wondering about like the landscape of becoming a technical writer as a profession. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, like I chose technical writing because I was like halfway through an English degree in college and realized I was setting myself up to like go to grad school or be a professor. And I didn't want to do either of those things. And I also never wanted to have to make choices about like, I mean, the basic like Maslow's hierarchy stuff, like, you know, where I lived or who I lived with or, you know, just the kind of, I never wanted to have to choose between, what's a good way to put this? Basically, I wanted to make enough money that I could make a set of independent choices for myself rather than having to rely on other people. And you know, technical writing, I think, is a really good entree into that for people who don't necessarily have the interest in being like a software engineer. I mean, you know,
I think that as a woman, having to make those, like, having to announce that you have to make independent choices is like such a like a man would never have to be like, okay.
So okay, we'll talk. The first draft of that answer, which I didn't say, was like I never wanted to have to like rely on my boyfriend to pay rent. Yeah. And like no disrespect to people who have partners with whom they have like a you know commingled life. Like I'm not speaking against those people at all. For me, I was raised with a set of values that was very much like do the things for yourself that you can, and then help other people when you can, right? And my career choices have very much been around that ethos.
Yes, there's no such thing as an independent man because it's perceived that they're already independent.
Well,
anyways,
like there's no such thing as an independent man or an independent person because we all live in a network of mutual support and at times like mutual exploitation, right? Like, I mean, don't get me going on my like social justice rant here because I'll go. But it's like, you know, I had the privilege to go to college and I had the privilege to grow up in an environment where, you know, my mom looked at me and said, you can accomplish with your career, which you know, it was assumed that I would have a career as opposed to, you know, having a career and also like getting married or, and only getting married and having babies, that kind of thing. Right. Like, where was
me
I
too.
going with that? I like,
what are a lot of technical writers female?
Weirdly, yes. It's one of those what we call like pink collar tech jobs. Where it's like it's a tech job that like is heavily populated by like my friend and coworker Heidi Wirehouse refers to this group as women and people who caucus with women, which I think is really funny. Like there's a large population of women in technical writing, and there's also a large population of like queer and like gender like GNC like people, which I don't really know what that's about.
Interesting. Okay. Okay, because it's kind of like technical writing is almost like such a beautiful balance between like soft and hard, like the hardness of like tech, like being in the tech world, and like the softness of like being a writer. I don't know, like it's very like yin and yang.
I was at the Write the Docs conference like maybe 3 years ago, and this person named Amelia Abreu, which I think is spelled Abreau, gave this wonderful talk about documentation as a care profession, and drew parallels between the work of, you know, work that is largely done by women, people of color, and immigrants, specifically around like healthcare, right? Like in-home care, nursing care, medical care, and drew parallels between that and a lot of the like what you call the like softer professions in tech. And the idea is that she was highlighting, I'm assuming Amelia's pronouns, I think she was a she, her. Amelia was highlighting the fact that all of society and therefore all companies exist in this network of mutually exchanged labor, and this idea that you know, at the top of a company you have like the rock star developer or like, you know, the rock star CEO or whoever's going to space this week. Oh my God. And they are sort of the person who makes the company work is just, I mean, it's just a lie. Like, it's just not true. Like, and I think that technical writing is definitely one of the like caring and support kind of professions in a tech company. And so because of that, you both get sort of the satisfaction of seeing how much work goes into making something that like really makes your product really great or makes your customers really happy. But you also get to see all of the failures that can result in things like interpersonal conflict or inconsistencies in communication or like failures in timeline and like just sort of all of the mess that comes from a group of human beings trying to work together. It all gets like boiled down into the caring roles for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Right. Where do you live within the organization?
So I want to like